At Easter dinner, my brother mocked me in front of everyone, saying not everyone can handle a real career in tech. Then Grandma turned to me and said, "Is that why your company just bought out his and laid him off?" The entire table went silent. Hey, Reddit. At Easter dinner last year, my older brother Nate decided to put on a show. That wasn't unusual. Ever since we were kids, Nate's been the loudest voice in the room, the self-declared golden child, the one who believed he was destined for greatness just because he could solve a Rubik's Cube faster than anyone in middle school. He rode that ego into adulthood like a prize horse. He went into tech straight out of college, software engineering, startups, flashy titles, constant name-dropping of founders and CEOs. To be fair, he was good at what he did, but he was even better at reminding everyone about it. Meanwhile, I had chosen a quieter path. I majored in business analytics and spent years building up my career in enterprise strategy. It wasn't flashy or particularly glamorous, but I was good at it. Quietly, persistently, I climbed. By the time I was 29, I was managing strategic acquisitions for a mid-size but rapidly growing tech firm. But unlike Nate, I didn't feel the need to broadcast every success like a walking LinkedIn post. That Easter, everyone was gathered at my parents' house. Grandma, a few cousins, our younger siblings, and even Nate's latest girlfriend, Brielle or Belle or something. She had a fake laugh and held her phone like it was glued to her hand. The wine was flowing, the ham was overcooked, and the passive-aggressive comments had started rolling in before we even got to the salad. I was talking to Grandma about a book club we both joined when Nate, with his usual grand timing, leaned back in his chair and said, "Not everyone can handle a real career in tech. Some people just float around the edges and call it strategy." There was a pause, not long, but just enough for everyone to catch the fact that he was talking about me. His girlfriend gave a high-pitched laugh like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. My mom chuckled nervously. My dad stared at his plate like it might answer for him. I just smiled because after years of this, I'd grown used to Nate's jabs. But Grandma, God bless her, set down her fork and turned to me. With the calm of a woman who's seen everything and fears nothing, she asked, "Is that why your company just bought his?" The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd ever heard at a family gathering. You could hear a pin drop. Nate's smirk faltered. Brielle's phone lowered an inch. My mom blinked slowly like she hadn't heard right. See, what Nate didn't know and what I hadn't said because I genuinely wasn't trying to showboat was that my company had just finalized the acquisition of the startup Nate worked for. I was the strategic lead on the deal. I'd reviewed their product viability, done the risk assessment, evaluated the team performance reports, and signed off on the final terms. And, yes, Nate's name had come up in one of the performance audits. It wasn't glowing. I didn't respond right away. I just took a sip of wine and said, "We're very excited about the integration." Grandma smiled and went back to eating like nothing happened. My dad coughed to cover a laugh. And Nate? He turned beet red and muttered something about how the deal was still early, and it didn't mean anything, except it did. For the rest of dinner, he barely spoke. And for once, I didn't feel like the shadow in his spotlight. I felt like the storm that had quietly been building while he danced in the sun completely unaware. The next few weeks were tense. Nate didn't reach out. My mom called me to ask if I had to rub it in. I didn't even say anything. I reminded her, it was Grandma. But the truth is, it wasn't even about that moment. It was everything that led up to it. Years of being told I wasn't ambitious enough. That I was just floating in corporate fluff while he was changing the world. Years of sitting through his lectures on how I should pivot into coding if I wanted to be taken seriously. Years of being dismissed because I didn't post a LinkedIn update every time I blinked. He always treated me like an amateur. But that acquisition, that wasn't a fluke. That was months of planning, navigating late-night calls, executive briefings, internal memos, and countless revisions. And when I saw his name in the employee roster, I didn't bat an eye. I didn't warn him. I didn't change a single thing because business isn't personal, but sometimes it's poetic. A week after the acquisition was finalized publicly, I got an email from Nate. It was polite, overly formal, and painfully careful. "Hi. I hope you're well. I was wondering if we could grab coffee sometime. I'd love to get your thoughts on the new structure and potential career transitions." Career transitions. I read that part twice. I already knew from HR that he wasn't being kept on in his current role. His team had been underperforming for over a year, and the CTO had flagged several redundant positions. Nate's was one of them. I didn't reply right away, not because I wanted to be cruel, but because I needed to think. This was the same brother who once told my high school boyfriend that I was too emotional for corporate life. The same brother who snatched the last dinner roll off my plate just to prove a point when we were 12. The same brother who told our extended family I worked in corporate decoration. But at the same time, he was still my brother. I did end up meeting him. We sat at a quiet cafe 2 blocks from my office. He looked tired, like reality had finally slapped him across the face. Gone was the cocky posture and arrogant lean. He looked like a man who just realized the ladder he'd been climbing was leaning against the wrong wall. He tried to make small talk, but it fizzled. Eventually, he said, "So I guess congratulations are in order." I nodded. "Thanks." And then he asked the question I never expected. "How did you do it?" Not with resentment, not with sarcasm, with real curiosity, and maybe, just maybe, a sliver of respect. That was the first honest conversation we'd had in years. I told him the truth. It took patience, focus, and the ability to listen more than I talked. I worked quietly, and when I spoke, people listened because I had something to say, not because I was the loudest in the room. He nodded slowly and then asked if I thought there was a place for him somewhere in the new structure. I didn't make any promises. I told him he'd have to apply through the internal process like everyone else, that I wouldn't be pulling strings. But I also told him that if he was serious about adapting, learning, and being part of something bigger than his own ego, then maybe, just maybe, there could be a spot. He nodded again. And when we left the cafe, he didn't hug me, but he did say, "Thanks, sis." That night, Grandma called me. She never brings up drama, but she simply said, "You handled that well. I always knew which of you had the real power." And for the first time in a long time, I felt like someone finally saw me not as Nate's little sister, not as the quiet one, but as someone who had built something real, something strong, and something worth respecting. But, of course, nothing in my family stays calm for long. Because just when I thought Nate might finally be on the path to humility and growth, something happened at the next quarterly meeting that changed everything. And it all started with a single forwarded email. 2 weeks after that coffee meeting with Nate, I was finally settling into a sense of peace. I wasn't expecting him to grovel or undergo a full personality transformation overnight, but he had seemed humbled. And I'll admit, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this could be the start of a better relationship. Maybe we'd finally relate as adults as equals. But then came the email. It was forwarded to me by our internal hiring team. Subject line, Strategic Career Pitch, Nate Williams. I opened it on a Tuesday morning while sipping my 3rd coffee of the day, expecting a simple resume submission or maybe a follow-up. Instead, I was greeted by a 5-paragraph message that read more like a brag-filled memoir than a professional inquiry. In it, Nate introduced himself not as a laid-off engineer seeking new opportunities, but as a visionary leader in the tech space who could help optimize leadership structures and elevate the company's innovation DNA. He dropped buzzwords like synergy, paradigm shift, and value extraction so heavily that I started to feel secondhand embarrassment. But the part that made my stomach twist. He wrote, "Given my deep understanding of both the acquisition landscape and internal operations, I believe I am uniquely qualified to partner directly with executive leadership, including my sister, who, while talented, has primarily focused on numbers rather than vision." I reread that line at least 3 times. I wasn't angry at first, just stunned. After all that, after everything, he was still trying to undercut me, still trying to frame himself as the real brains of the family, still couldn't help taking a jab even while asking for a job. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I flagged the email and brought it to our HR liaison and the VP of operations who had final say on hires for the new structure. They both looked at me after reading it. "You want us to bring him in for an interview?" the VP asked carefully. "No," I replied. "I just wanted you to see it. If he applies through the formal channels, treat him like any other candidate. But if he tries to use my name again, bring it to me." They nodded. They could read between the lines. I wasn't playing favorites, but I wasn't letting him manipulate his way into a position he hadn't earned either. I figured that would be the end of it. It wasn't. 3 days later, my mom called. She was upset, saying Nate told her I'd sabotaged his chances of being rehired and was using my position to punish him for being successful. I nearly dropped the phone. "Mom," I said calmly, "I haven't done anything except not let him lie his way into a job he isn't qualified for." He wrote an email implying I was all numbers and no vision. "Do you think that's how you get a job?" She didn't answer. Instead, she mumbled something about family needing to stick together. I realized then that no matter how much I grew or how high I climbed, Nate would always be Nate. And my parents, they'd always be his enablers. But I wasn't 12 anymore. I wasn't seeking validation from people who refused to see me unless I bet myself into someone they approved of. So I told her the truth. "I'm not your son's safety net. I've worked too hard to build what I have. If Nate wants a role here, he needs to earn it like everyone else." She hung up after a tense goodbye. That weekend, Grandma visited me. She brought a pie, sat on my balcony, and listened as I told her everything. She didn't interrupt, just nodded quietly. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes, people don't want you to succeed. They want you to stay where they're comfortable seeing you, below them." I asked if that was how she felt raising my mom and uncle. She smiled, but her eyes were sad. I knew who they were early on, but I also knew I couldn't force them to grow. That's a choice. The following Monday, HR informed me that Nate had submitted a formal application this time without mentioning me. I let out a sigh of relief. Maybe, just maybe, he'd learned his lesson, but the interview didn't go well. He talked too much, listened too little, and spent half the time pitching ideas for a department that didn't exist. He even referred to himself in the third person at one point. The hiring manager told me later, trying not to laugh. We didn't move forward with his application. Nate didn't call me, didn't text, didn't even rage post on LinkedIn. Instead, he disappeared into the tech ether for a while. Eventually, I heard through the grapevine that he'd taken a freelance contract with a startup in Austin back to square one, only now with a dented ego and no safety net. Meanwhile, I kept growing. I was promoted to VP of strategy that fall. I led 2 more acquisitions. I hired 3 new analysts, none of whom were related to me. And I kept in touch with Grandma, who sent me a handwritten card after every press release. Then came the next Easter. I wasn't planning on going, but Grandma called the week before and said she was bringing her famous lemon cake, and she wanted me there. So I went. Nate was there, quieter than before, no girlfriend on his arm this time. When we made eye contact, there was a flicker of something, shame, maybe, or understanding. He came up to me after dinner. We stood in the kitchen, plates clinking in the background, Grandma humming to herself. "I was an ass," he said simply. I didn't disagree, but thank you for not making it worse. I didn't say anything, just nodded. That's when Grandma walked by, set her cake down, and said with a sly smile, "Looks like you've finally figured out who's really running the show." And this time, Nate didn't argue.